He found his dying neighbor's abandoned mail order, bride freezing in snow. What happened next shocked. Wyoming Territory, winter of 1889. The wind carried a vicious howl across the open plain, a sound sharp enough to cut through the heavy logs of Daniel Kerrigan's barn. Snow whipped against the windows in frantic waves, erasing fence lines and swallowing the horizon whole. It was the kind of storm that made even seasoned ranchers pray they could outlast the night. Daniel had been finishing the last of his chores, securing the shutters before the wind tore them loose, when he heard it, a horse screaming, a wild, panicked cry from somewhere near the tree line at the edge of his property. Daniel froze, breath clouding in the icy air. No animal sounded like that unless something was terribly wrong. He grabbed his coat, pulled it tight across his chest, and strode toward the corral. His own horse, Flint, paced uneasily, ears pricked toward the far woods. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured as he saddled him. "Let us see what fool is out in this weather." The words were gruff, but worry tensed his jaw. Nobody traveled in a blizzard, unless they were desperate or dying. Snow blinded him as he rode, the wind striking so hard it rattled his bones. The faint sound of the panicked horse came again, closer now. Flint stopped abruptly near the bend of the trail, hooves sinking deep into fresh drifts. And there, half buried beneath the snow, Daniel saw it. A body, a woman's body. She lay face down, arms curled protectively around a small leather satchel. Her hair was crusted with ice, dark strands frozen to her cheeks. Her dress was torn, soaked through, stiff like a frozen tarp. For one terrifying moment, Daniel thought she was already dead. He leaped from the saddle, stumbling through the knee-deep snow. His gloves brushed her shoulder. Cold, too cold. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked through the storm. "Can you hear me?" The wind nearly drowned the tiny sound she made, a breath, thin and fragile. He carefully turned her face up, brushing snow from her lips. Her eyes fluttered weakly. "Please," she whispered, is this the Parker Ranch?" Daniel stiffened. The Parker Ranch, his closest neighbor. A man who had died 2 weeks earlier after months of failing health, buried on a hill now covered in snow. "There is no one at the Parker place," Daniel said gently. "Why were you trying to reach it?" Her lips trembled. He sent for me. A letter. I came all the way. From Missouri." Her breath hitched. "Mail order bride." Daniel felt something in his chest twist painfully. Old Parker had never mentioned a bride. No one in town had heard a word about it. Had she been on her way to marry a dead man? Her voice cracked again. "He wrote that he would meet me. I thought I saw a lantern." She sagged in his arms, consciousness slipping away. "Stay with me," Daniel said urgently. "What is your name?" She struggled for air. "Brenda." Then her head fell forward, limp against his shoulder. Daniel's pulse surged. The cold had sunk too deep. She was moments from freezing to death. No, not tonight," he muttered, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, snow-soaked fabric and bones. "You did not come all this way to die in a ditch." He managed to hoist her onto Flint's back, climbing up behind her. But the moment he pulled her against him, he felt it. Her breathing was shallow, fading. Her body was ice. He dragged off his own coat, wrapping it around her shoulders, then pressed her close to his chest, giving her the only warmth he had left. The wind knifed through his shirt instantly, but he tightened his hold, refusing to let her slip. "Come on, Brenda," he murmured, voice fierce against the storm. "Do not quit on me now." Her head lolled against him, limp. He spurred Flint forward, heart pounding, snow cutting into his face like shards of glass. Her breath fluttered weakly against his ribs, slower, softer, too soft. Daniel's fear sharpened into something raw and primal. "You do not get to die here," he growled into her ear, as though the force of his voice could anchor her to life. "Not when you have come this far, not when someone was supposed to be waiting for you." He pressed her closer, shielding her with his own body as the storm screamed around them. The ranch house lights appeared at last, a faint glow in the blizzard. Daniel kicked the horse into a desperate sprint. Tonight, life or death rode on minutes. And he was not about to lose her. Warmth was the first thing Brenda noticed. Not heat, exactly, but the gentle kind that crept under her skin, chasing out the ache in her bones. The second thing she noticed was the smell. Broth, something rich and herbal simmering nearby. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw, but the scent made her stomach twist with need. She opened her eyes slowly. She was lying on a narrow cot, wrapped in heavy quilts. Around her, the room was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. The walls were thick logs, rough but solid. A cabin, modest, functional, clean. She blinked, trying to sit up. Every muscle ached. Her head swam. Then she saw the tray on a stool beside her, metal bowls steaming with soup, a tin spoon, and a folded slip of paper. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Eat first, questions later. The handwriting was simple, direct. Brenda looked around. The cot was tucked behind a canvas curtain, strung from nails to offer privacy. Her bag, still damp, rested neatly beside the cot. Someone had dried and folded her dress. A thick flannel shirt had been left on top of the bundle. She recognized it from the night before. His shirt. Everything was arranged with care. Not a single thing out of place. No signs of rummaging, no signs of threat. Still, her chest tightened. She was alone, in a stranger's home, and yet she was alive. Slowly, she lifted the bowl, sipping the broth. It was simple, but warm and comforting. She ate in small, careful bites, tears prickling behind her eyes with each swallow. The last thing she remembered was the blizzard. The man, his voice in the storm. "You don't get to die, Harry." The door creaked open. She froze. Daniel stepped in, shaking snow from his coat, and paused when he saw her awake. His eyes, a soft gray, met hers for a moment before he spoke. "You're awake?" he said simply. "That's good." Brenda gripped the edge of the blanket. "Where am I?" "My cabin, near the ridgeline. I found you yesterday." She hesitated. "I don't remember much." "You asked for the Parker Ranch," Daniel said. "He died 2 weeks ago." Brenda's face crumpled. He sent for me. I thought. Daniel held up a hand, gently. "You can explain when you're ready." She looked at him carefully. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-30s. There was a quietness to him, like a man who spent more time with animals than people. His face was lined with sun and wind. His hands, calloused and rough, curled loosely at his sides, strong hands, but not threatening. "I should leave," she said softly, half rising. "I should get to town, find." Daniel interrupted, his tone calm. "Snow says otherwise." She faltered. He stepped aside and opened the door a crack. White as far as the eye could see. Drifts waist deep. The storm hadn't passed. It had just paused. "You'd last an hour, maybe," he said, closing the door gently. Brenda swallowed, shrinking back into the blanket. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "You're not," Daniel replied, then nodded toward the curtain. "You rest. I'll be outside." She watched him as he stepped away, picking up a lantern and disappearing out the back. Night came. Brenda drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, the wind howling just beyond the walls. The fire crackled steadily in the hearth. Sometime after midnight, she woke again. A draft brushed her cheek. She sat up slightly, pushing back the curtain, and saw him. Daniel, still in his boots, sat near the door, wrapped in his coat. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes flicked now and then to the rafters, to the way the wind shifted, the snow piling on the roof. He was watching for collapse, for danger, for her. He hadn't left her alone, not once. Brenda pressed a hand to her mouth, heart twisting. No one had ever watched over her like that, not even back home. She lay back down slowly, a tear slipping free and soaking into the edge of the pillow. He said little. But tonight, silence spoke louder than any promise. The next morning broke gray and quiet. Snow clung to the windows, muffling the world outside. Brenda sat at the small table, wrapped in one of Daniel's thick flannel shirts, her own dress still drying near the hearth. She hadn't spoken much after breakfast. Daniel didn't push. He sat across from her, sipping his coffee in silence. Finally, she cleared her throat. "He wrote me 6 letters, she said, voice barely above a whisper. "George Parker. Said he needed a wife, someone to help tend the land. Promised me a home. Said there was a small house already built, and some hens, a good piece of earth." Daniel didn't speak, but his jaw tensed. Brenda's eyes dropped to her hands. "I've never had much. I worked as a seamstress, then in a boarding house kitchen. When his last letter came, with the train fare and a map, it felt like something real, a future." She looked up, eyes shining with quiet hurt. "But when I arrived in town, no one was there. I asked for him at the station. They said he was dead, 2 weeks gone." Daniel exhaled sharply, setting his cup down. "Yeah," he muttered, "dead and buried. Liver gave out. Took to drinking hard near the end." Brenda's fingers tightened around her cup. "I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe he'd made a mistake in the date, so I followed the directions in his letter. I thought I could make it to the ranch before dark." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know the storm was coming." Silence settled between them. Finally, Daniel leaned back, arms crossed. "You weren't the first promise he didn't keep," he said flatly. "He was trying to sell his land to Silas Boone before he died." Brenda blinked. "Who's that?" "Man owns most of the valley," Daniel said. "Rich, ruthless. Has a knack for getting what he wants, usually by buying out desperate men like Parker." Brenda's brow furrowed. "Then why didn't he just sell?" Daniel hesitated. "Because the land wasn't solely his. Long story short, his late wife's family put conditions on it. Couldn't be sold unless he was married again, or passed it on to a wife." He met her eyes, expression hard. "He sent for you to legitimize the deal. Marry quick, sign the papers, and hand you off with the land attached." Brenda stared at him. The hurt came slow, like cold water soaking into fabric. "You're saying I was part of a business transaction?" Daniel didn't answer, but the silence said enough. She looked down, her breath catching. The little dream she'd held on to, of hens, a garden, a home, crumbled like frost underfoot. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought maybe he saw something good in me." Daniel's voice was quiet. He saw what he needed. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I gave up everything," she said, more to herself. "Left the boarding house. Sold Mama's locket for the train fare. Told everyone back east I was starting a new life." A pause. "Now I have nothing. No man. No land. No name on a deed. Just a bundle of lies, and a storm that nearly killed me." Daniel didn't interrupt. He watched her closely, every line of her face tight with grief. Then Brenda whispered, voice breaking, "I don't have anywhere else to go." The words hung heavy in the cabin. Daniel didn't speak. He rose slowly, walked to the hearth, and returned with 2 tin mugs, steam curling from both. He set one in front of her. Hot cocoa. Then, without a word, he pulled the other chair closer to hers, sat down beside her, not touching, not speaking, just staying. Brenda stared at the mug, her throat too tight to speak. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, in the silence between them, something shifted. No promises, just presence. And for the first time since the snow began to fall, she didn't feel alone. The storm lingered. Day after day, the sky stayed gray, the snow thickening until it buried the fence posts and muffled the world in white silence. The wind eased now and then, but the cold held fast. No one came, and no one could leave. Inside the cabin, the world shrank to warmth, wood smoke, and 2 people, slowly becoming less like strangers. Brenda began to move with more confidence. The blanket stayed folded during the day. Her color returned, and with it, a quiet determination. "Let me help," she said one morning, already rolling up her sleeves. "You're still healing." "I'm not broken," she said simply. So Daniel let her. She chopped onions, kneaded dough, and mended the frayed cuffs on his flannel shirts with careful fingers. Her stitching was fine, precise. Daniel noticed she even straightened the spice shelf, muttering something about Eastern kitchens not being chaos. He didn't argue, he just watched. One afternoon, she found a half-used skein of yarn tucked in a drawer with old tins. She held it up. "Mind if I borrow this?" "Wasn't using it," Daniel said. By that evening, she was knitting something long and gray beside the fire. When he asked what it was, she didn't look up. "A scarf, for you. Yours is falling apart." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. Evenings were spent with her reading aloud while he whittled or fixed gear. She had a low, steady voice, and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. "I didn't take you for a romantic," he said once, after a particularly passionate passage from Jane Eyre. "I'm not," she replied, "but I like women who keep going, even when everything tells them not to." He thought about that long after she'd gone to sleep behind the curtain. One morning, as the snow lightened, Daniel brought up the idea of riding. "If you're going to stay out here even a little while," he said, "you ought to know how to handle a horse." "I've ridden before," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Once. In Boston. At a party. That doesn't count." So he saddled up his oldest, gentlest mare, Lark, and led her out to the open yard where the wind had flattened the snow. Brenda climbed up with care, her gloved fingers white-knuckling the reins. "You'll be fine," Daniel said. "Just keep your back straight. Trust the horse more than your boots." Brenda made it halfway across the yard before a gust of wind caught Lark's tail and startled the mare. She tensed, lost balance, and slipped. Daniel was there in 2 steps, catching her before she hit the snow. Her body hit his like a feather. They stood there for a beat, her hands against his chest, his arms around her. "You said she was gentle," she muttered. "She is. You're just stubborn." She didn't let go right away. Neither did he. That night, while she was reading aloud from the armchair, Daniel sat by the fire, quietly whittling something from a block of pine. She didn't ask what it was. The next morning, Brenda found it beside her breakfast bowl, a wooden spoon, simple but smooth, with BW carved neatly into the handle. She held it up, eyebrows raised. "You made me a spoon?" Daniel took a sip of coffee. "You're the one doing all the stirring." She chuckled, a real surprised laugh that filled the room. "I've had gifts before, but never a spoon." "It's yours," he said simply. Later that day, she came to him near the woodpile. The spoon was in her hand. "I should probably give this back," she said, her voice hesitant. "I mean, I'll be heading out once the weather clears." Daniel wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at her. Then he stepped forward and gently folded her fingers back over the spoon. "You don't return gifts made in winter," he said, voice low but certain. "They're carved to last." She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, eyes glassy with something she didn't want him to see. And that night, for the first time, the silence between them felt not like distance, but like a quiet they shared. The snow was just beginning to melt when the knock came. Daniel opened the door to find Jeb Carter, the horse wrangler from the edge of town, his mustache heavy with road dust and bad news. He stepped inside, brushing off his coat. "Thought you ought to know," he said without preamble. "Folks in Stone Hollow are talking." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About you. About her." Jeb glanced toward the curtain, lowered his voice. "Word is, you found Parker's mail-order bride, kept her here. Some say you're keeping her like, well, not like a gentleman should." Daniel's jaw tensed. "She nearly died in the snow. I gave her shelter." "Don't matter to people who want gossip," Jeb said. "Boone's stirring it. Says Parker had land claims, and now you've got the woman and the lands in question. Makes it look like you set it all up." Daniel's voice was flat. "That's a lie." "I know," Jeb said, tipping his hat. "But lies travel faster than wagons. Thought you'd want a head start before the church ladies come calling." When Jeb rode off, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Brenda stepped out slowly, her face pale. "I heard," she said. I heard everything. Daniel didn't answer. He returned to chopping wood outside until the axe echoed through the silence like a metronome for everything left unsaid. That night, Brenda packed. She moved slowly, carefully folding the flannel shirt Daniel had loaned her. She gathered her things into the small bag she had arrived with, still muddy from the road. When she zipped it shut, the sound felt final. Daniel stood by the fire, staring at the flames. "You don't have to go," he said. "I do," she whispered. "If I stay, they'll think worse. You'll lose the land, you'll lose everything." He didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the shelf, pulled down a small leather pouch, and handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the valley, a marked trail to town, and 5 gold coins wrapped in cloth. "I can't take this," she said, voice shaking. "It's too much." "It's all I've got," he replied. Brenda looked at him, her voice rising with the ache in her chest. "Why would you help me like this? Why give me everything if I'm just a burden?" Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the fire, its light flickering in his quiet expression. "Because nobody did that for my mother," he said. "She was left behind. People talked, and no one helped. I swore if I ever had the chance, I'd do better." Brenda's breath caught in her throat. Daniel finally looked at her, his gaze steady. "You're not a burden. You're a person. That's all." She didn't speak for a long time. Outside, the snow had begun to thaw, but inside the cabin, everything felt frozen between them, except the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. The wind carried the sound of hooves long before the rider appeared. Daniel stood on the porch, sharpening his knife out of habit more than need, when he saw the silhouette cresting the hill, tall, broad, riding with the arrogance of a man who thought everything in sight might someday be his. Silas Boone. Behind him trailed 2 more men. One Daniel recognized, a local ranch foreman with no real loyalty, just a need to be close to power. The 3 horses stopped in front of the cabin. Silas dismounted, brushing invisible dust from his fine wool coat, boots too polished for honest work. "Well now," he drawled, "heard a real pretty story floatin' through town. A story about a Parker bride, and a thief who took her." Daniel said nothing, just stood, one boot forward, weight even. Silas continued, "See, Parker owed me land rights, future partnership, said he'd seal it with a wife, since he had no heirs. You know how the law works out here. A mail-order bride. That's as binding as ink on a deed." "You're saying she's part of a land deal?" Daniel's voice was flat. "I'm saying she is the deal," Silas sneered, "and the cabin's part of it too." Brenda appeared behind the door, lips tight, hands shaking, but she didn't hide. Silas saw her, and smiled like a wolf. "There she is. Little lost bride. Come now, girl. Let's make it easy. I got papers waitin'. You marry me, and the whole thing smooths over." Brenda stepped forward, each word clear and cold. "I'd rather marry a snake." Silas chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's no way to talk to your future." "I have no future with a liar." She pulled something from behind her back, the last letter Parker had sent. She held it up and let it fall into the mud. "That promise died with him, and so did your deal." Silas's eyes narrowed. "You have no legal claim here." "She's under my roof," Daniel said, finally stepping down from the porch. His hand rested lightly on the rifle slung by the door. "That's all the claim that matters." "You gonna fight me over a woman who ain't even yours?" Silas asked. Daniel's eyes didn't flinch. "She's not yours either." Silas made a move, not for a gun, but a step forward, testing. Brenda froze. Daniel moved faster. He picked up the rifle in one smooth motion, cocked it, and leveled it at Silas's chest. "You cross this threshold," Daniel said, his voice low and deadly. "You'll meet my father's bullet, still buried under that hearth. It's waited 10 years for the right reason." Silas stared at him, jaw tight. Behind him, one of his men shifted in the saddle, uncertain. Silas exhaled slowly. "This ain't over." Daniel didn't blink. "It is if you ride now." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Silas turned, mounted his horse with a jerk, and spat into the snow. "You're gonna regret this," he hissed. "Already do," Daniel said, rifle still steady. And then, with one last glare at Brenda, Silas Boone turned and rode into the white. The snow had begun to soften under the early signs of spring. Icicles still hung from the eaves of the cabin, but birds had returned to the trees, singing tentative notes into the cold morning air. Inside, the fire crackled low, more for comfort than survival now. Brenda stood at the table, folding the same shawl she had arrived in weeks ago. She paused, running her fingers along the worn edge, then turned to look at Daniel, who sat by the hearth, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. Daniel didn't look up. "Dangerous habit." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Were you planning to live like this forever? Alone, out here, with nothing but wind and cattle for company?" He stopped sharpening, set the knife down slowly. His shoulders dropped. "I used to think solitude was safer," he said after a moment. "Less to lose, less to regret." She stepped closer. "That's not an answer." He sighed, staring into the fire. "I tried once, a long time ago, before the war took half my town, and the fever took the rest. I met a girl in Texas. She had a laugh that made you forget the dust. I thought she was the one." Brenda waited. "She ran off with the first wagon train heading east. Left a note under my saddle, said I was too broken to fix." Silence settled between them. "I came here to forget," Daniel continued, "to build something with my hands, to make sense of the silence. It worked. Until that horse screamed in the woods, and I found you in the snow." Brenda moved to the chair, across from him, sat down slowly. "You saved me, Daniel." He looked at her then, tired eyes soft. "No, I just opened a door." "You did more than that." Her voice trembled. "You gave me blankets, food, shelter, but that's not what saved me." She leaned forward, hands trembling slightly as she reached for his. "You saved me in the way you live, in your quiet kindness, in the way you watch the roof for snow, in how you listen without asking. You saved me by not asking me to be anything more than who I am." Daniel's throat worked around the lump rising in it. His hands closed gently around hers. "I don't know what kind of life I can offer," he whispered. "I've got rough land, slow seasons, and a name folks still whisper about." "I don't need promises," Brenda said. He exhaled shakily, then said, "If you want to go, I won't stop you. You deserve to choose your own path. But if you stay—" He looked up, eyes raw. "Then this cabin, this place, me, it'll all be yours. Not because you owe me, but because I want you to have it." There was a long, still moment. Then Brenda smiled, not the polite kind, but one that reached all the way to her eyes. She tightened her fingers around his. "I'm not staying because I owe you," she said softly. "I'm staying because I choose to." Daniel looked at her like she was the first sunrise after a long, brutal winter. And for the first time in years, hope settled into the cracks of his quiet heart. The following spring, when the last frost had lifted and the earth smelled of thawed soil, Daniel and Brenda were married. There was no preacher in town, so old Mr. Garvey, who once ran the post office, stood between them in the backyard of the cabin. A handful of neighbors gathered, some bringing jars of pickled beets and bundles of wildflowers as gifts. Brenda wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself. Daniel wore his father's coat. Their vows were quiet, spoken with hands clasped and eyes steady, under the cottonwood tree Daniel had planted when he was 20. Afterward, Brenda planted blue asters and prairie roses under the front windows. "So folks know a woman lives here," she said, laughing softly as she brushed soil from her skirt. The flowers took root quickly, just like she had. Within a year, the cabin felt transformed. Brenda turned one corner of the house into a tiny schoolroom, teaching letters and numbers to ranch kids whose parents couldn't read or write. She made ink from boiled walnut husks and stitched notebooks from scraps of paper. Daniel, encouraged by her courage, started holding reading nights in the barn for the ranch hands who had never learned. At first, only 2 showed up. But soon, By firelight, and with mugs of coffee in hand, half the valley's men were sounding out words from almanacs and Bibles and old dime novels. "Never seen so many grown men proud to read about weather patterns," Brenda teased him one night. "Never thought I'd see this place full of voices," Daniel replied, a quiet smile tugging his lips. The town's whispers began to shift. Where once people muttered about stolen brides and scandal, now they spoke of community and second chances. Brenda was no longer the mysterious woman from the snow. She was Mrs. O'Connor, the lady who taught their children, who remembered birthdays, who brought warm bread to sick neighbors. Daniel, once the strange man who kept to himself, was now Dan, the one who fixed fences and helped birth calves and stayed late to read maps with kids dreaming of exploring. They had made a life, not grand, but solid, built with hands, warmed with laughter. Another winter came. The wind howled across the plains, just as it had that first night. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed. Brenda stood by the window, a shawl around her shoulders, watching Daniel on the roof, patching a leak with cedar pitch before the storm hit. She pressed her hand to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. The world outside was already turning white. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "You found me in the snow," and from that day on, I never felt cold again. Behind her, their little home hummed with quiet life. A pot simmered on the stove. Children's books lay in a neat stack by the door. Her woolen teaching bag sat ready for the morning, even if the roads were snowed in. Outside, Daniel climbed down from the ladder, his coat dusted with white. He looked up at her through the window and smiled. Brenda smiled back. He had saved her from the snow, but she had saved him from the silence. And the cabin, once just wood and stone and shadows, was now a home, glowing with warmth that even the fiercest Wyoming blizzard couldn't touch. If Daniel and Brenda's story warmed your heart, from the moment he found her in the snow to the day flowers bloomed on their porch, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who still believes that love can grow even in the harshest winter. Drop us a comment below. Do you believe a storm can be the beginning of something beautiful? We'll see you in the next story, where love always finds its way, even through the snow.